Let's continue in week 3 in unplanned healing. So we met this woman in Mark 5, and she carried around this physical problem for 12 years, but it wasn't just a physical problem, it was a social and religious problem, and the result was shame. She carried around great shame with her. She was on the margins of society, she was isolated from people, and in Mark 5:27 through 28, though, this is what we find. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. So this woman learns that Jesus is in town, and she wants to be healed by him. Many people were just like her. Many people tried to get healed by Jesus, and she was sort of superstitious. She thought, if I could just reach out, if I could just grab his jacket, he'd heal me. And so Matthew, who also tells us this story, he tells us that she touched the very fringe of Jesus's coat, just the tassel on his cloak, and we find out what happens. Verse 29, immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering, that in just one moment she was healed. Not like she felt a little bit better, but she was completely and utterly and totally healed. Jesus had done a work inside of her. Even though he didn't talk to her or touch her, she touched him, and yet she was healed. This is kind of unusual. Normally in the Bible, Jesus is touching people to heal them, but at this time, Jesus doesn't do anything. He's very passive. She touches him, and she is healed. And so there's this a little tension here, because she has done something she shouldn't have, and Jesus, he understands that power has gone out from him, and so he turns to the crowd and he searches for who has touched him, which leads to a little humor. But eventually the woman comes forward and she reveals her shame. She tells the whole truth to Jesus, the disciples, and the crowd about who she is and what she's done and what she's been experiencing for the last 12 years, and how she was immediately healed when she touched Jesus. And this is what Jesus says to her: "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." This is Jesus' message to her. He's not harsh with her. He says, daughter. He's tender with her. But he wants her to understand it wasn't her superstition that healed her. It wasn't that she just magically touched him. There was no magic going on here. It was her faith in Jesus. That's what healed her. And he says, go in peace. She's experienced no peace. All she's experienced for the last 12 years is suffering. But Jesus tells her, now I want you to experience peace. And it teaches us this, that Jesus turns our shame into acceptance. We all carry shame with us. We all, in one way or another, we're like that woman. We have sin in our lives. We have brokenness in our lives. And the Bible says that that is shame. But Jesus looks at our shame and he turns it into acceptance. He turns it into acceptance when we put our faith in him. Remember, Jesus was careful to say to the woman, your faith has healed you. And he says to us, when we put our faith in him, our faith in Jesus, we are healed, we are forgiven, and we can go in peace and be freed from our suffering. So Jesus can turn your shame into acceptance, and it happens when you put your faith in him, when you trust in him. So as a group, take turns sharing your stories of Jesus freeing you or others from guilt or shame. You know, the way that this story really impacts us and can be applied to our lives is when we understand that Jesus still turns our shame into acceptance. So those of you who are willing, share a story about a time in your life where you felt guilt, where you felt shame, condemnation, and how Jesus dealt with that. Or maybe tell a story about someone else you know, someone who carried around a lot of shame, maybe for a lot of years, like this woman in the story, and how Jesus dealt with that shame, dealt with that guilt, and turned it into acceptance. How he said to them, go in peace, be freed from your suffering.